I was always looking for something in between, something that linked that remote past with the present moment. I found, to my amazement, it is alchemy.
Jung's early understanding of his own consciousness laid the foundation for his ongoing study and exploration of the psyche, a journey that would accompany him throughout his life. Human beings never speculate as much, nor hold so many opinions as they do about things they do not understand. From childhood, Jung experienced strange and seemingly inexplicable episodes. He feared going insane and began searching for a possible cause. I saw yellow waves, floating debris, and the death of countless thousands. 2 weeks passed, and then the vision returned, even more violent than before, and an inner voice spoke. "Look at it. It is completely real and will happen. You cannot doubt it." Jung had these visions shortly before the outbreak of World War I, and when it happened, he was certain that he was not suffering from schizophrenia. He understood that his dreams and visions originated from the substratum of the collective unconscious. These visions continued into adulthood, providing unsettling premonitions that aligned with significant historical events.
Now, can I take you back to your own childhood? Do you remember the occasion when you first felt consciousness of your own individual self?
That was in my 11th year. There I suddenly, on my way to school, I stepped out of a mist. It was just as if I had been in a mist, walking in a mist, and I stepped out of it, and I knew I am. I am what I am. And then I thought, but what have I been before? And then I found that I had been in a mist, not knowing to differentiate myself from things. I was just one thing among many things.
The education Jung received and the environment of his early years played a crucial role in shaping his perspectives on consciousness and reality. During his adolescence, he not only had unusual visions, but also experienced events that defied any rational explanation. During a summer holiday, while immersed in his studies, he heard a sound resembling a gunshot coming from the next room. Frightened, Jung rushed into the room and saw that a beechwood table had split from the edge to the center. About 2 weeks later, he heard another mysterious noise coming from a cupboard in the kitchen. This time, upon opening it, he found that the bread knife, used just moments before, had broken into 3 pieces. These unexplainable events fueled Jung's fascination with the unknown, driving him to explore the depths of the human psyche and the mysteries of the supernatural. How is it possible that such significant events, unconnected by any apparent causal chain, can occur? What does this say about the physical universe? These were the questions that tormented him most during those years. Jung went on to complete his medical studies and became a psychiatrist. During this time, he participated in seances in an attempt to communicate with the dead, and developed an interest in parapsychology and the occult, primarily due to his personal experiences. This laid the groundwork for his medical dissertation, published in 1902, titled On the Psychology and Pathology of So-Called Occult Phenomena, a Psychiatric Study. On one occasion, while discussing parapsychology with Freud, the latter, in his materialism, dismissed most of Jung's theories as nonsense. In the middle of their conversation, Jung felt a strange sensation in his diaphragm, as if it had turned into burning wood. At that moment, a loud noise came from the bookshelf behind them, so loud that they both stood up in alarm, fearing the object might fall on them. Jung said to Freud, "There, that is an example of exteriorized catalysis." Freud responded, "Come now, this is sheer nonsense." Jung replied, "No, it isn't, Sigmund, and to prove it, I predict that in a few moments we will hear another loud noise from the bookshelf." And indeed, it happened. Jung wrote in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Even today, I don't know what gave me that certainty, but I knew without a doubt that we would hear another loud noise. Freud stared at me in astonishment. I have no idea what was going through his mind or what his expression meant. In 1928, Jung was drawing mandalas for his Red Book when sinologist Richard Wilhelm sent him a copy of The Secret of the Golden Flower, an ancient Chinese alchemical text that reveals a unique meditation practice aimed at achieving wholeness. Jung was astonished by the parallel between the Chinese alchemical mandala and the one he was working on for his book. In commemoration of this event, he wrote beneath one of his mandalas, "In 1928, while I was painting this picture, showing the well-fortified Golden Castle, Richard Wilhelm in Frankfurt sent me the ancient Chinese text about the Yellow Castle, the germ of the immortal body." Jung's work with mandalas and his interest in Eastern philosophy further illustrate his quest to understand the interconnectedness of all things. He wrote of Wilhelm, "The spark ignited and lit a flame that became one of the most significant events of my life." Jung was particularly struck by a drawing of a yogi with 5 human figures emerging from the top of his head and another 5 figures growing from the top of each of those heads. Jung believed the drawing depicted the spiritual state of the yogi as he prepared to shed his many egos and transition to the most complete, objective state of the self.
After I had written that book, that cost me my friendship with Freud because he couldn't accept it. To him, the unconscious was a product of consciousness, and it simply contained the remnants. I mean, it was a sort of storeroom where all the discarded things of consciousness were heaped up and left. But to me, the unconscious then was already a matrix, a sort of basis of consciousness of a creative nature, namely capable of autonomous acts.
Jung coined the term synchronicity and mentioned it publicly for the first time in 1930 during his commemorative speech for Richard Wilhelm, who also translated the I Ching, or Book of Changes, from Chinese into German. He referred to it as a peculiar principle active in the world, so that things happen together in some way and behave as if they were the same thing, and yet, for us, they are not one and the same.
One thing is sure, a great change of our psychological attitude is imminent. That is certain.
Why?
Because we need more. We need more psychology. We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied, because we are the origin of all coming evil.
Jung equated it with the Chinese concept of Tao, the union of opposites through the complementary pairs of yin and yang. This resonates with the Hermetic principle of correspondence, which states, "As above, so below," referring to the inner and outer worlds, psyche and matter, depicting them as a unified whole. The goal of the Taoist sage is to live in harmony with the Tao, avoiding extremes and achieving balance. Similarly, this is the aim of Jungian psychology, balancing opposites, consciousness and the unconscious, aligning the ego with the self as the center of personality. Individuation and self-realization do not follow a linear path, but unfold through a circular process, akin to circumnavigation, where one progressively approaches their central core. This process is symbolically represented by the mandala, illustrating how all parts of the psyche are interconnected and oriented toward a unifying center. For Jung, identifying one's own mandala symbol is essential for the progression of individuation. To function as such, the mandala must include a central symbol, such as the sun, a castle, or a golden flower, which acts as a visual anchor and represents the divine pattern or manifestation of the self. This central symbol signifies the unity and order that the self strives to achieve. The culmination of this process is represented by the alchemical procedure of the mysterium conjunctionis, a term Jung also used as the title for one of his most significant works. In this context, the opposing forces of life merge in a sacred marriage, leading to greater clarity of consciousness and a deepened unity of being. For more than 30 years, I have been interested in this oracle technique or method of exploring the unconscious because it seemed to me to hold uncommon significance. It ties into a curious principle I have called synchronicity, a concept that offers a perspective diametrically opposed to that of causality, as the latter is merely a statistical and not an absolute truth. Synchronicity is a kind of working hypothesis on how events evolve from one another, whereas synchronicity takes the coincidence of events in space and time as something that signifies more than mere chance.
You know, there are these peculiar faculties of the psyche, that it isn't entirely confined to space and time. You can have dreams or visions of the future. You can see round corners and such things. Only ignorance deny these facts. It's quite evident that they do exist and have existed always. Now, these facts show that the psyche, in part at least, is not dependent upon these confinements. And then what? When the psyche is not under that obligation to live in time and space alone, and obviously it doesn't, then to that extent, the psyche is not submitted to those laws. And that means a practical continuation of life, of a sort of psychical existence beyond time and space.
Causality describes how one event directly causes another, as in the case of a billiard cue striking a ball and determining its movement in a specific direction. Synchronicity, on the other hand, reveals connections between events that transcend simple cause and effect, exposing meaningful and profound patterns that link external and internal events in non-causal ways. The essence of synchronicity lies in the meaning of these connections. For example, an internal event such as a dream, thought, or mood may find a counterpart in the external world, creating a moment of coincidence where the inner and outer worlds seem to reflect and confirm each other. These moments imbue a person's life with particular significance, suggesting an underlying order or intentional design that goes beyond chance. The term synchronicity combines the Greek prefix syn, meaning together, with chronos, meaning time, indicating the simultaneity of events that coexist or occur at the same moment. Jung was long preoccupied with the problem of synchronicities, and in his study of the phenomena of the collective unconscious, he encountered coincidences so closely related that they defied all statistical probability, pointing to a dimension of connection that eludes conventional explanations based on causality. Wolfgang Pauli, a renowned quantum physicist and Nobel Prize winner, sought therapy from Carl Jung and shared many of his dreams with him. This collaboration proved extraordinarily fruitful. Even after completing his therapy, Pauli continued to correspond with Jung, a fact documented in the book Atom and Archetype, which collects their exchanged letters. Together, Pauli and Jung developed the idea of synchronicity as an acausal principle that transcends the limitations of space, time, and causality. It took nearly 20 years for them to be ready to present their revolutionary and controversial theories. In 1952, they co-published the volume The Interpretation of Nature and the Psyche. Later, Jung's contribution, titled Synchronicity, an acausal connecting principle, was included in Volume 8 of his collected works. He wrote, "As a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, I have often encountered the phenomena in question and have been able to convince myself of how much these internal experiences meant to my patients. In most cases, they were things people did not speak about for fear of exposing themselves to unreasonable ridicule. I was astonished to see how many people had such experiences and how jealously they guarded the secret."
The archetype is a force, it has an autonomy. it can suddenly seize you. It is like a seizure.
Yes.
So, for instance, falling in love at first sight, that is such a case. You see, you have a certain image in yourself without knowing it of the woman, of the woman.
Yes.
Now you see that girl, or at least a good imitation of your type, and instantly you get a seizure, and you're gone. And afterwards you may discover that it was a hell of a mistake, and that is the archetype. Well, that is the archetype of the animus.
Jung's approach to archetypes highlights how deeply rooted patterns influence our behaviors and dreams. According to Jung, synchronic events can be primarily explained through the concept of the archetype. Archetypes are instinctual patterns of behavior that govern the organization of unconscious psychic processes. They form the structure of the collective unconscious, a component of the psyche shared by all individuals, containing universal images of creation and acting as a master blueprint for life. Archetypes structure psychic material and create meaningful patterns in the physical world, even though their nature is such that they cannot be directly perceived or represented. Jung described them as psychoid, indicating a reality that interacts with the psyche but exists independently of brain activity, significantly influencing our personal lives. Meaningful coincidences, therefore, have their roots in an archetypal foundation, and these patterns manifest in social myths and cultural phenomena, shaping collective experiences. This unified understanding of all human experiences is expressed through the alchemical concept of unius mundus, or the one world. Jung stated, "If the symbolism of the mandala is the psychological equivalent of the unius mundus, then synchronicity is its parapsychological equivalent." This suggests that just as the mandala visually represents the concept of unity and totality in psychology, synchronicity represents a parallel phenomenon on a more subtle and metaphysical plane.
The world hangs on a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. Assume that certain fellows in Moscow lose their nerve or their conscience for a bit. It is nowadays we are not threatened by elementary catastrophes. There is no such thing as an H-bomb. That is all man's doing.
Yeah.
We are the great danger. Psyche is the great danger. What if something goes wrong with the psyche?
Yeah.
And so you see, it is demonstrated to us in our days what the power of the psyche is of man, how important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it.
The psychic life is essentially a unified domain shared by all, at the center of which lies the pleroma, the space where past, present, and future coexist simultaneously. This concept suggests that everything that will happen has, in a sense, already occurred, reflecting the extraordinary nature of synchronicity. Jung described a potential synchronistic event that illustrates this complexity. On April 1st, 1949, I noted in the morning an inscription depicting a figure that was half man and half fish. At lunch we ate fish. Someone then mentioned the custom of making April Fool's jokes, literally April fish in some languages. In the afternoon, a former patient I hadn't seen in months showed me some remarkable images of fish. Later I was presented with an embroidery depicting sea monsters and fish. The next day, another former patient, whom I hadn't seen in 10 years, told me he had dreamed of a large fish the night before. Months later, while working on these observations for a larger study, and just after finishing writing about them, I went to a spot on the lake in front of my house where I had already been several times that morning. This time I found a foot-long fish on the retaining wall of the lake. With no one around, I had no idea how the fish had gotten there. When coincidences of this kind occur, it is difficult not to be impressed. However, Jung expressed doubts about whether this sequence constituted a true example of synchronicity, as there was no clear interaction with the inner world. He suggested that it might simply have been a highly improbable conjunction of events, with an additional occurrence months later. Jung also warned of the risk that synchronicity could be misused or pathologically misinterpreted, cautioning that people might become overly enthusiastic and start seeing every event as imbued with meaning. In 1961, Carl Jung completed his final significant work, an essay titled Approaching the Unconscious, intended for the volume Man and His Symbols. This decision was influenced by a dream that encouraged him to make his studies more accessible to the general public. A few days before his passing, Jung experienced a series of profound dreams, the last of which was particularly symbolic. He dreamed of standing on a height surrounded by a stone boulder under a blinding sun. Inscribed in the stone were words celebrating his accomplishment and uniqueness. Take this as a symbol of the wholeness you have achieved and the uniqueness you have become. In another dream, he saw a square where trees intertwined with gold were growing, a symbol of alchemical resolution and completeness. These messages from the collective unconscious seemed to affirm that Jung had completed his journey, saying, "You have earned the freedom to move on. You have done your work. You did it well, and it will grow." Shortly before his death, Lawrence van der Post, a friend of Jung traveling from Africa to Europe, dreamed of Jung bidding him farewell for the last time. Soon after, a dramatic event occurred. A storm produced a lightning strike that destroyed one of Jung's favorite trees in his garden, under which he loved to sit. Years later, while van der Post was filming a documentary at Jung's home in Zurich, another instance of synchronicity occurred. As he described on camera how lightning had struck Jung's beloved tree, lightning struck the garden again. These events, rich in symbolism and timing, underscore the extraordinary nature of synchronicity in Jung's life and work. Synchronicity is a reality ever present for those who have eyes to see.